In today's video, let's practice some sample questions for your PRINCE2 Practitioner exam. Hi, I am Ray and I'm an authorized trainer for PRINCE2 certification, and I have helped many aspiring project managers in their careers to become certified project managers. Now in this video today, we will be solving some medium to high difficulty level PRINCE2 Practitioner exam questions which will help you firstly to understand the genuine look and feel of the PRINCE2 Practitioner level exam questions if you are preparing to write the exam anytime soon, and secondly, if you are preparing for the PRINCE2 Practitioner exam already, you might use today's session to assess how well you are prepared for the exam. So get a pen and a paper and let's get started with question number 1.
Right, so in this tutorial today, we'll be solving 5 sample questions for your PRINCE2 Practitioner exam, and these questions will be aligned to the 7th edition of the PRINCE2 exam. Okay. Now, while solving questions for the practitioner level of the PRINCE2 exam, generally you will find that all of these questions will be linked to one of these 4 scenarios which will be provided to you during the exam. Okay. So for example, if you're writing the PRINCE2 practitioner exam, you will get all your questions related to one of these 4 scenarios. Okay. Now these 4 scenarios are already given in this book, which is the PRINCE2 7th Managing Successful Projects by Axelos. And for today's session, we'll be using scenario 3, which is the FindF scenario, right? Now, for copyright reasons, guys, I'll not be able to divulge the details of these scenarios in a public video on YouTube, okay? So I'll recommend that you open up your PRINCE2 7th edition manual with me, study the FindF scenario yourself, and then start answering the questions with me as a part of this exercise, okay? Now, the good part about the PRINCE2 7th edition framework is all these 4 scenarios that has been provided by Axelos links to different industries, okay, or links to different disciplines. For example, the data knowledge scenario links to IT, okay, the Lewiston City Council scenario links to maybe somewhat of civil and somewhat of socio-economic and socio-political aspects of council, okay. The FindF scenario links to, let's say, financials and also links to a bit of cybersecurity. Okay. So overall, you will see there is a good mix of various scenarios touching various aspects of the industry. And that's a good part because in the previous edition of the PRINCE2, we didn't have such kind of scenarios where we could have linked our learnings with real life examples. Okay. So this is a good step forward in terms of linking the learnings of PRINCE2 to real life case studies. Okay. Now coming back to this, please open the page where this FindF scenario is presented to you as part of this PRINCE2 7th edition manual, and let's get the discussion started. Right, so here comes question number 1, question number 2, and question number 3 from the practice of business case for your PRINCE2 7th edition practitioner exam. Okay. Now in today's exercise, we'll be solving 5 questions from the topic of business case. Okay. Now in your PRINCE2 practitioner exam, you will also find 5 questions from this practice of business case. The first 3 questions will be a matching question that you are seeing on screen right now. And question number 4 and question number 5 would be normal scenario questions that will be linked to the FindF scenario as part of this exercise today. Okay. So by doing this exercise, you will have a complete understanding of how to tackle the section of business case in your PRINCE2 practitioner exam. Okay. Now I'll pause here. Please read the question and try to answer it before we move forward. Okay. So just to give you a gist of what this question is, this is the question stem. Statements 1, 2, and 3 highlights some activities which are executed by some roles which are provided in the second column. Okay. You need to match the activity with the right role. Okay. Please note that each role can be used once, more than once, or not at all. Okay. So it is very important that one role can be repeated across multiple activities if there is a right fit. Okay. However, you need to choose only one role for each activity. Okay. So I'll pause here. Please read the question and try to answer it before we solve this together. Right. So let's start solving this question together. Here are 3 activities from the business case practice for the FindF 2 project. Now, if you have studied the FindF 2 project from your PRINCE2 7th edition manual, you will know that the summary is that FindF is a company. They are rolling out a program, FindF2, to deploy various, let's say, cybersecurity and IT security elements in the financial industry. Okay. Now, one of the projects linked to this FindF2 program is to develop some products or let's say some service applications for the financial industry. And that is what the scenario is all about. Okay, now in this question it is asking that for this FindF2 project, okay, which is a subset of the overall FindF2 program, these are few of the activities that you see on the left hand side of the table, and you need to match these activities with the right roles. Okay, so let's go one by one. Let's see. Activity number 1, document the management actions required to ensure that the outcomes from the products of the FindF2 rollout are achieved. Okay, now it's a tricky one because many of you might think that, okay, if it is talking about the outcomes of the product, okay, it is talking about rollout, which is, let's say, a part of like post project benefits. This might link to the senior user, right? However, please note that it is talking about documenting this management actions. Okay, it is not talking about designing or recommending those management actions. So it is very crucial, guys, that you read each and every word of your question to avoid falling into such traps. Okay, now if you have read this question superficially, you might have selected option A, which is senior user, but that is incorrect, guys. Okay, so the correct match to this question is the project manager, because the project manager, which is option number E here. Okay, so the project manager actually documents the management actions which has been aligned by the senior user, senior supplier, and the project executive as part of the post project benefits realization program. Okay, so it is very important to know that who is recommending an action and who is documenting an action. Okay, so very critical. Please go to your PRINCE2 manual and study the appendix section, okay, where they have highlighted the various roles and responsibilities related to a PRINCE2 project. I think you will find it in appendix 1 or appendix 2. I'm not too sure, but it is definitely in the appendix section of your PRINCE2 manual. Okay, so the correct answer to question number 1 is option E, which is project manager. Okay,
Next, let's move on to question number 2.
now let's go to question number 2. Get further funding because the increased costs of developing an additional product within the FindF2 program has caused the project cost tolerance to be exceeded. Okay, now this is what is happening, that there is an additional product which has been recommended, okay, within the FindF2 program, and this has caused the project cost tolerance to be exceeded. Okay, now that is the problem statement. Okay, now you need to identify which role is responsible to get further funding to enable this. Okay, now if you again go back, read the roles and responsibilities of a typical PRINCE2 project, you should be knowing that getting further funding is the responsibility of the project executive, which is option C here. Okay, so the correct match to question number 2 is option C, which is project executive. The project manager, the senior user, the senior supplier can put those recommendations of the funding, but getting that funding from the program office or from the portfolio office is the responsibility of the executive. So it is very crucial in a PRINCE2 project to understand who is doing what. Okay, so the correct answer to question number 2 is option C. Okay,
I hope you are enjoying the session, right? Please press the like button if that's the case, and also make sure you subscribe to my channel Project Mastery with Ray if you wish to view more of such educational content. And now let's move on to question number 3.
Let's go to question number 3. During a benefits review meeting, this role, okay, advised the project manager that the expected market share gain via the FindF2 program. Now, please read the FindF2 scenario. Then you will be able to understand what this statement is talking about. So the expected market gain via the FindF2 program would be 12% less than previously estimated targets at the beginning of the project. Okay, now this statement is talking about a benefits review meeting that is happening, and one person, which is this role, okay, he or she is advising the project manager that the expected market share gain will be 12% less than the previously estimated target. Now, who is doing that, guys? Okay, it is done by the senior user, because the senior user is the role which is responsible for defining and designing the targets of post project benefits realization. Okay, now if that targets are on track or off track, also the responsibility comes to the senior user to highlight it at the right point in time and plan any corrective actions if necessary. Okay, now on that grounds, the correct answer to question number 3 is option A, which is the senior user, because this role is responsible to advise the project manager, okay, that look, We have estimated, let's say, the post-project benefits of this project, which is the market share gain would be 24%, okay, which was the baseline, but now it is 12%, okay. So we are expecting a 12% fall, and these are my recommendations, okay. So that is a responsibility of the senior user. Again, please go back to the appendix of your PRINCE2 7th edition manual and study the details of the various roles and responsibilities of a typical PRINCE2 project. So for example, what are the roles and responsibilities of an executive? What are the roles and responsibilities of project assurance, business assurance, team manager, project manager, etc., etc. Because to answer these type of questions correctly and to capture such kind of nuances that we talked about in question number 1, which was to document, we talked about question number 2, we talked about in question number 2, which is to get further funding, okay. So these kind of keywords or these kind of finer nuances you will be able to catch once you have a solid understanding of the various roles and responsibilities in a PRINCE2 project as per the 7th edition framework, okay. So in question number 1, 2, and 3, and these questions will be coming as sets, as you see right on screen here in your actual exam as well, okay. So 1 is option E, which is the project manager, 2 is option C, which is the executive, and 3 is option A, which is the senior user.
Right, next, question number 4.
Right, so question number 4, guys. This is again related to the find F scenario and linked to the business case practice of PRINCE2 project. This is the question. This is the question stem. You need to select an option between A, B, C, or D, which you think is correct. Okay, so please take a shot at it before we solve this together. You can pause the video here if you wish to. Right, so let's start. During stage 3 of the FindF2 product development project, okay, the project manager is assigning work packages to the team manager. Okay, when it was identified that the cost of the deliverable early market testing, okay, again, please go back to your manual and check the deliverables section of the FindF project, and you will see this deliverable called the early market testing linked to the stage 3 of the project. Okay. So when it was identified that the cost of the deliverable early market testing was re-estimated, and the new estimate is about 45% higher than the baseline. Okay, so that's a change that was identified. So an estimate was done with respect to this work package of early market testing, or let's say this deliverable of early market testing during the initiation or the planning stage of the project. And now during the execution stage, it has been estimated that the correct figures for this deliverable is about 40% higher than the baseline. Okay, now the question is, who should review how these costs will affect the business case and why? Okay, so you are not only expected to select the role who should review these costs and understand that how it will affect the business case, but you also need to select the rationale against it. Okay, that why this role is the correct role to execute this action. Okay, so the two set of options which are provided to you are the senior supplier, okay, and the project assurance. Okay, and basis these two classifications which you see as part of these options, there is a set of reasoning that has been provided. Okay, so there are two levels of analysis you need to perform as a PRINCE2 aspirant as part of this question. Okay, now the good part about solving such questions, guys, that if you know or if you understand how the roles and responsibilities behave in a PRINCE2 project, you can easily eliminate 50% of the options. So let's say, for example, if you are quite conversant with understanding that, okay, if there is a change which has come in a project, which party or which role is responsible to assess that change, to understand the impact of it to the business case. And if you know that, yes, this role is the project assurance role who is actually responsible to do this, you can safely eliminate option A and option B straight away from the table. Okay, so 50% of your problem statement is solved right at this step where you are able to eliminate option A and B, because you know that definitely senior supplier is not the role which is responsible to identify the impact of a change on a business case. Okay, so you are left with option C and option D. Okay, now this strategy of 50-50 elimination will only make sense if you have a solid understanding of the roles and responsibilities. Okay, now let's say you do not have that kind of a knowledge and you are still trying to evaluate each and every option. as it has been provided to you. So let's look at option A and option B, and let's understand how we can eliminate this on solid reasoning as well. Okay, so option A is saying senior supplier, which is of course incorrect. Okay, let's see the reasoning. Because they should be involved when a change affect the supplier business case. Okay, now this is too far-fetched, right? Because this change will definitely affect your project, which is the project in question, which is the FindF project. Now whether that effect will percolate to the supplier business case or not is a second level of analysis. Okay, now we really don't know whether this 45% higher cost estimate will translate to some cost overrun at the supplier side. Okay, so that is a assumption we can make at this point, but this assumption might have a probability associated with it. Okay, now no doubt that the senior supplier should be responsible for the supplier business case, but this option is incorrect because it incorrectly links the business case of a project to the supplier business case without any right linkage. Okay, so that is why option A is definitely out of the table. Let's look at option B. Senior supplier, again on the first level of analysis this will definitely come as incorrect, but let's look at the reasoning. Because they are responsible to ensure cost effectiveness of the project deliverables. Now that's a too broad statement, guys, right? Now senior supplier is definitely responsible to ensure some sort of cost effectiveness. Okay, but if the initial estimates are incorrect, and if there is a cost baseline hurt, or if there is a cost overrun which has been estimated, it should be the primary responsibility of the project manager or the project assurance or the executive or the senior user to understand how that can be absorbed or that can be mitigated. Okay, now the problem with option B is partially correct. I'm not doubting the fact that the senior supplier will be responsible to ensure the cost effectiveness of a project by getting a competitive deal with the supplier. But here the situation is very different, right? Because in this scenario, it has not been highlighted that whether this deliverable early market testing was re-estimated because the supplier said that, okay, I will increase my costs from baseline because the costs which I provided during the initiation stage were incorrect. Okay, the question is not saying that. It is not saying that the change has happened due to supplier going back on his or her initial cost estimates. Okay, that is not really the reason for this cost overrun. Okay, and precisely for that reason option B is also incorrect, because overall option B is giving a statement which is correct, but it is not really linked to the scenario that has been presented as part of this question. Okay, so that is a random argument that has been provided which is having no, or let's say very limited linkage to the actual scenario. So option B is definitely out of the table. Okay, now let's look at option C. Project assurance. Now we are talking, right? Because project assurance is definitely the role who assesses, let's say, any impact which might come into the business case, and executive, senior user, senior supplier, they are all part of the project assurance. Okay, they all oversee the project assurance role and responsibility. Let's look at the reasoning. Because they should be involved in assessing the impact of a change to business case. Okay, now that seems like a reasonable option, because project assurance is indeed responsible to assess the impact of a change on the business case. So that is a clear-cut statement that has been provided linked to the scenario, and it is also providing you a statement which is correct as part of a general PRINCE2 project as well. Okay, so let's hold this option for now. Let's look at option D. So it is also saying project assurance because, okay, let's look at the reasoning. They are cognizant about the risks related to cost overrun for the project. Okay, again, what is the problem here with this option, guys? Now they are cognizant, that is perfectly fine, about the risks related to the cost overrun for the project, but okay, what is the role they are playing? Okay, is it only intellectualization that they are cognizant but they don't take any action? How good will it be for the project? Okay, or what good will it do to the project manager or to the project when there is such kind of a situation that has been presented to you? Merely being cognizant about a risk doesn't really complete the role and responsibility of project assurance. Okay, so that is the reason option D is incorrect, because it is incorrectly depicting the role and responsibility of a project assurance role. Okay, so the correct answer to this question is option C, which is the role is project assurance, who are to estimate this impact of this 45% higher cost overrun to the project, because they should be the governing body who needs to assess the impact of a change to a business case. And the project assurance is a role which is deployed by the project board and monitored by the project board. This role is independent of the project manager or the team manager, okay, to prevent conflict of interest. So these kind of nuances will come to you as you get more experienced in terms of studying and understanding the various roles and responsibilities of a PRINCE2 project. Okay, very critical, guys, right? So the correct answer to question number 4 is option C.
And finally, question number 5. I hope you are taking notes, because I'm sure that you are at least learning something new as part of your PRINCE2 exam preparation as part of today's session.
Okay, so the final question from the business case module of the PRINCE2 practitioner exam. This is the scenario of the question linked to the FindF project. This is the question stem, and you need to select the correct option between option A, B, C, or D. Okay, so I'll pause here. Please read the question and try to answer it before we take this together. Right, so let's get started. The CIO, which is the Chief Information Officer of FindF, has advised the executive that the business case for the FindF2 has already been worked out at the program level, and hence there is no need for the product development project to produce an outline business case at the start of the project. Okay, now to understand the scenario properly, you need to understand the FindF2 project. Okay, FindF2 is a program which has been chartered by FindF. Okay, so FindF, the company, has chartered this program which is called FindF2 to increase its market share within the industry. Now note that this FindF2 is a program. Okay, this FindF2 is not a project. Within FindF2 there are multiple product development projects that are happening, and your scenario which you see in your PRINCE2 manual is one of these product development projects. Okay, so development project 1, development project 2, development project 3, so on and so forth, right? So to answer this question properly, you need to understand how this flow is coming from the overall company of FindF into a program which is FindF2 into the project which is a product development project which is FindF2. Okay, so here what it's happening is, as a part of this scenario, the CIO of FindF is saying that look, the FindF2, which is a program, already has a business case that has justified the rollout of this program. So you as a project manager, or you as the executive of one of this product development which is under this FindF2 program, you need not to produce an outline business case at the start of the project, because the outline business case or the business case has already been designed as part of the program. Okay, now is this an appropriate application of the business case practice, and why? Okay, let's look at the options one by one. Again, there are two schools of thought that has been provided. One school of thought is saying that no, because of some reasoning. The second school of thought is saying yes, because of some reasoning as well. Okay, now again, if you are an experienced or if you are an adept PRINCE2 exam taker, you'll be able to eliminate 50% of the options if you know that it is not correct to start a project without a proper outline business case, even if the program level has a business case of its own. So if you have that understanding, you can definitely eliminate option C and option D, because you know that this is not a correct and appropriate application of the business case practice. Okay, so option C and option D are off the table, but again we'll come back to it and again eliminate it on solid grounds just to enhance your learning. Okay, but let's look at option A and option B. Option A is saying no, this is not correct to not have outline business case at the start of the project, because each project should have a formal mandate before initiation stage. Okay, let's hold this option for now. We need to evaluate it and see that, okay, whether this is making sense. Let's look at option B. No. Okay, again, it's on the same school of thought saying that no, this is not an appropriate application, because the principle of continued business justification should be applied to any PRINCE2 project. So it's a very close tie between option A and option B, but let's again eliminate option C and D first, just for your learning. Yes, okay, which is definitely incorrect, because the project is directed and controlled at a program level. This is incorrect. The program management doesn't direct and control each and every project. Okay, the program management controls the program and the project board for every project, because the project board reports to the program board. Okay, and each and every project should have a individual project board. Again, please go back to my webinar and watch that, because I have explained these type of fundamental concepts in very detail within that webinar. So option C is incorrect. Let's look at option D. Yes, so that's incorrect, because the project must always use the business case from the program. So that is definitely incorrect. The project is not entitled to use and copy the business case directly from the program. Okay, it may take a reference of the program business case, but the business case for the project itself might be somewhat different than the business case of the program. Okay, again, I'm taking a reference of my webinar. I have explained this concept of project, program, and portfolio, and how each of these business cases are linked with an example of Nestle in that video. So please go ahead and watch that video as well. Right, so that is also incorrect, right? Because the project is not always entitled to use the business case of the program per se. Okay, and that is why if you see this superlative here as well, which is saying that must always, this is again hinting that this is not like totally correct, because it is providing you a 0 or 1 scenario, which is not really the case. Of course, the project can take references from the program business case, but the project business case might be somewhat different than the program business case. Okay, so that's the logical reasoning why option C and option D are incorrect. Now let's come back to option A and option B. So both the options are saying that no, this is not an appropriate application, which is correct. Okay, but let's look at the reasoning of these two options. Option A is saying that no, because each project should have a formal mandate before the initiation stage. Okay, now the thing is, this statement is not entirely incorrect. Okay, this statement, if you take it in isolation for a PRINCE2 project, this is a correct statement. So each project should have a formal business mandate from which the project starts, but it happens when? Does it happen at the initiation stage, guys? Please go back to your books. It doesn't happen at the initiating a project stage. It happens at the starting up of a project stage. Very important. And this option is a classical option, how you need to relate the learnings from the processes of PRINCE2 to answer a question from the practices domain of PRINCE2. Option A is incorrect because it is incorrectly relating a activity which generally happens in the starting up a project phase to the initiation stage or the initiating a project process stage. Okay, that is incorrect. The formal mandate or the project mandate comes and gets designed at the starting up of a project phase, not at the initiation stage. These two stages are very, very different, guys. Again, please go back to your books, study the details, or go back to my webinar and watch that section again. Okay, so that is why option A is incorrect. Okay, and the correct answer to this question is option B, which is no, because the principle of continued business justification should be applied to any PRINCE2 project, which is correct. Okay, because the continued business justification principle is a fundamental principle that defines the existence of an outline business case for each and every project, whatever the business case of the program is. Okay, so that is the key learning which you need to take out of this exercise. Now you might question that, Ray, in this option B there is again a superlative of any, and it is saying that okay, the continued business justification should be applied to any PRINCE2 project. So Ray, is it true that the continued business justification should be applied to any PRINCE2 project? Of course it's true, guys, right? Because it is a principle which is a very fundamental principle of any PRINCE2 project. So this superlative is correct here. Okay, and this superlative has a very correct application as part of this option. So just do not start blindly accepting or eliminating options based on superlatives, that if you see like must, always, any, should, you start accepting or rejecting it. Okay, so that's a very foolish shortcut that many PRINCE2 aspirants take, and they of course eventually end up selecting the incorrect option. So always evaluate any superlatives that are provided in a question based on the context. So the context of this superlative is perfectly correct. Any PRINCE2 project should have a definite continued business justification principle, and that principle should be the basic premise of why a PRINCE2 project should need a outline business case, regardless a business case exists for the program or not. Okay, so the correct answer to this question is option B.
I hope you found the session helpful. In case you are planning to prepare for the PRINCE2 exam and you wish to enroll into one of my training programs, please drop me an email and one of my team members will reach out to you. I am Ray and I'm an authorized trainer for PRINCE2 by PeopleCert, and I look forward to meet you again in the next video.